Welcome to Reclaiming Home, a podcast focused on delivering thoughtful conversation and tangible actions to make housing justice a reality in our communities. I'm your host, AsaleSol Young, Executive Director of Housing in Action, an educator, activist, and proud Turtle Papa. I'm a Black legacy native of Evanston, Illinois, and a proud descendant of Haitians and rural Black and Indigenous North Carolinians. Join me as we take time each month to dive into all things housing, including potential policies, community dreams, persistent systemic barriers, neighborhood successes, and anything and everything in between. We're so glad you're joining us.
Here at Housing in Action, we acknowledge that we live our lives and do our work on land that European colonizers stole from the Dakota peoples indigenous to Minnesota. In order for this theft to occur, sadistic acts of genocide, rape, and forced assimilation were employed. We also acknowledge that we live our lives and do our work on land that was cultivated and developed by bodies that European colonizers stole from the West African countries through the transatlantic slave trade. In order for these thefts to occur, sadistic acts of genocide, rape, and forced assimilation were employed. We acknowledge what was taken from our collective human ancestors. As we do so, we commit to work and fight for the liberation of the descendants of those enslaved through American chattel slavery and the sovereignty of all Native American peoples.
Hello, and welcome to Reclaiming Home. Today, I am so excited for our conversation as I'm joined by Dr. Amber, who I know has quite the following and supporters, rightfully so, for their just amazing content that engages us all in deeper thinking around our culture and community. I'd love to kick off our episode with you, Dr. Amber, just sharing your pronouns for our audience and a little bit about yourself.
Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation this afternoon. I'm Dr. Amber. I use they, them pronouns. And a bit about me, I am a Minneapolis resident, not born and raised here, but I've been here for this year's 10 years, which is absolutely insane to think about. And I moved here to do my PhD. I'm a sociologist by training. And, over the last year or so, I've been really working on, building a platform, which is how you and I connected, talking about sociology broadly, society, politics, particularly in thinking about Minneapolis. I'm also a scholar and an expert in the study of race and racism in America. So a lot of my focus is there and thinking about like how we think about and understand the structure of race and racism in this country. And so, and a lot of also what I've been doing recently is thinking about racism and housing and like where those two things intersect, particularly in thinking about my own lived experience, which we'll get into in this conversation. And so just excited for the opportunity to talk a bit more about everything that I'm interested in.
Absolutely. And again, thank you for joining us. For those of you that are newer to our podcast, just a reminder that my name is AsaleSol. I am the executive director here at Housing in Action. I use they, them pronouns, or if you're feeling like we're all connected, you are free to call me sibling. Housing in Action is a 31-year housing justice nonprofit. Our mission is to lead the fight for housing justice so that all people have a safe, stable, and dignified place to live. Our vision is housing justice for all. Let's get into it. Dr. Amber, you have been really generous, I think, online and very willingly and openly shared that you are in the process of purchasing a home. Mm-hmm. And that it has been challenging. So I'd love to actually start today with talking about that process and what you see is changing for both future generations versus past generations in the ownership space. Well, let's just start with the journey. How are things going? Yeah,
things are good now. I've completed the purchase of the house. I live in it. You're joining me from the house that I recently purchased. So, the experience, we closed about a month ago, actually almost exactly a month ago. And so the further we get away from that date, the sort of the calmer things feel. But I think it's really helpful to think about and for me to talk about like how I came to this home buying journey, because I think we have like so much of what I encountered like as I was like in the home, as my wife and I were in the home buying process, was like so many implicit assumptions that this is the thing that we've always dreamed about, wanted, or that this was ultimately a goal of ours, right? None of which were actually true for us, right? And so we kept sort of running into this, all these implicit assumptions about what homeownership is and what it means. And I think it's so important to unpack that. So, my wife and I had been really like explicit with each other and like with our community that like buying a house was not a priority for us, like, right, like it is a lot of work, it is a lot of responsibility, and it's just a thing that we like didn't really want to take on, and so we had been renting a house in South Minneapolis, that we loved. We really loved the house, and we did a lot of things to like make it our own, right, and sort of really suddenly, so last year, um we asked our landlord about potentially renewing our lease, and they were like, well, actually, would you guys be interested in buying the house? And we were like, I don't really want to do that, but like we sort of felt the need to like kick the tires on it. So we did some thing, um I got the house inspected, we really talked to each other, and we ultimately decided that it wasn't the right decision for us. And then they decided that they wanted to move forward in selling the house otherwise. And so then that sort of put us in a position to say, like, well, okay, like, well, what are we going to do now? Are we just going to find another place to rent, which is totally fine. We can do that. But then, like, are we just going to end up back in this cycle again of like, we found a place, we loved it, we made it our home, and then ultimately end up displaced. And so when we initially had started kicking the tires on buying the house we were living in, we had attended a first time home buyers workshop, and we connected with a realtor that we really really liked, and so we got reconnected with her, and sort of from once we made the decision sometime in like early March to like kick the tires on exploring a house, like we started exploring buying a house in March, we closed at a house in early June, right? So it was like a very, very fast process. And I want to pause here and just like name that like I deeply understand um the privileges that I have and have access to be able to so quickly pivot into buying a house ultimately, right? That is not something that I take for granted. It is not something that I hand wave away. I understand how deeply important that is, and so and as I'm talking about my experience, I want to be true to it and also like name that like yeah, but ultimately, like you were still privileged to be able to like be in a position to buy a house, right? Like there was a ton of privilege inherent in that, and I don't take that for granted, and so I always want to like pause and say that. So, the process of getting to buying this house was really clunky for us, right? Like it was not a thing that I know for a lot of folks they dream forever of being able to buy a home, and they're saving for it, and that's the thing that they're working on, and like that was not my goal, right? Like in April, I was in Mexico. That's what I was working. That was what I was focused on. I was like, hey, I would like to live my life and go on vacation, right? And like really quickly having to like pivot back into this has really been an illuminating experience about like renting and displacement and how generational wealth and having access to it or not. And it's been really just like an illuminating process for me.
And so, yeah, no, I really appreciate that, like helping folks understand. And I want to dig into some of that because you kind of gave us a lot. You gave us a lot of like your perspective, your experience, walking through it. But I do think it's helpful for folks to hear a real life story of a family who did not plan on buying,
Mhm.
but in the process of avoiding displacement was like, we're going to take control of the situation, recognizing the privilege inherent in that, as you named, and then becoming an owner. So I'd love for you to break down for folks why you were not interested in buying to begin with. Like, how did you see home buying versus home renting before this purchase?
Yeah, that's a really fantastic question. I'm glad you asked it. So for me, I think that owning a home is a scam, right? Like I think it like like while I understand the ability to like take control and to like have ownership over where you live, like ultimately like that just roots in you this idea that like your fate is tied to like your own individual circumstances or actions, and that in order to have any sort of control over your life, you have to be a property owner, right? And so within that is inherent this idea that people who rent do not deserve that same level of autonomy and freedom and stability, right? And it's so then it's in telling people that it's like, well, you have to then work to be able to buy a house, or you have to, commit to buying a house in order to get that stability. I think is ultimately like something I don't agree with. I think also like inherent in all of this is that like home buying is not a thing that everybody just has equal access to, right? Like, which is often talked about as if it is. It is not, right? You have to like, as someone who's just moved through the home buying journey, so much of that process relies on having um the flexibility, right? The flexibility to go see houses, to go respond, to have the conversations you need to have to be able to complete a home purchase. It relies on having financial access, right? And so I think that like for me, renting had felt like a way where like I didn't have to tie myself to an asset that ultimately is just like is in constant homes are in constant state of repair. They always need something. They are a money pit. And I also hate the idea that like we tie so much of our own individual fortune to to the equity that we have in our homes, because ultimately what that makes us is bad neighbors, right? It makes us more um concerned with our own property values, such that we aren't willing to say, hey, let's have an affordable housing unit like built in my neighborhood, because then that can affect ultimately lower your property values, which could then have an impact on like your either long-term stability, the wealth you have to pass on, right? And so I think that just like everything, the way that we do home ownership in this country is, in my opinion, rooted in white supremacy, right? It is rooted in like people only being focused on like them and their individual families and not about the broader community around them. And I
Yeah.
think that like I wanted, like for me, renting was a way to like opt out, was to both like opt out of that system, was to also not sign myself up for the labor involved in being a homeowner. Um, and getting to this place of ultimately now like being a homeowner, right? Like you either, you die or you live long enough to become the villain type situation is what this is. Like it is truly about circumstance and just like seeking that level of stability that like this country just does not provide to people who choose to rent, people who choose to rent, or people who through no under circum through not having the ability to purchase have to rent.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And one of the things that we think is really important at Housing in Action is really making sure that folks understand the nuance of the purchase, if that is their choice.
Yeah.
Oftentimes, the narrative is perpetuated that that is success. That's the sign of success. It's like how you build wealth for your future, for your family, and that the economics of that are indeed shifting. And it still works for some folks, right? It's still like a path that works for some folks, and there are alternatives that work better for others. And the reality is that you can change. like in your case, right? You're like, I'm a hardcore renter. Now actually look at me, I'm an owner. So change is okay. I think a lot of times we think I gotta be one thing or the other. Binaries don't exist. So I want to get in even deeper with you, Dr. Amber.
Please, please.
We all come from somewhere, right? Like you have a family of origin. And I'm so curious, how is home ownership viewed in your family of origin? And how is that different from your journey?
Yeah, I'm a first generation homeowner. Like that is very much like my lived experience. I think that like I don't know if my family of origin views homeownership as as anything more than survival, right? Like I do not come from any sort of generational wealth. I do not come from I think there's one other person in my family I know who owns their house. I think that might be it, right? Like and that happened like in my adulthood, right? And so like I don't know if like my family even has a relationship to homeowning because I think, and as you know, I am Black American. I am descendant of chattel slavery in America, right? Like my family of origin has not had access to the sort of wealth um, or privileges required to be able to access home ownership in a way that is like sustainable or in a way that is replicable. And so I think that like I like there are a lot of people in my family in my family who probably think that like I am wealthy, right? Like who think I have access to like a level of wealth and privilege that I don't. But like I get why, right? Like I totally understand why. Like it is like being able to achieve this thing that like has for so many Black folks in America has just been systematically shut off, right? Either through direct policy or through implicit policy. And so I think it's almost like but sort of like I said, it's almost like my family doesn't even have a relationship with homeowning because that is not a thing that we have had access to.
Right. And so now that you have entered into that space, what I heard you say is that you're considered wealthy. Is it because of that, or was that the perception beforehand? Or
I definitely think it was the perception beforehand, and I think this gets into like some of the privileges that like come I've like come to the world and to homeownership with. Like I'm also a first generation college student and college graduate. Absolutely first generation graduate student, PhD. Um, by leaps and bounds, I have like the most level of education in anyone in my family of origin. And that's not a thing that I say is like I'm better than anyone. Just like literally, it's factual because again, in the same way that home ownership, has been systematically walled off from Black Americans, as has education and access to higher education in particular. Um, and so I think it's both my status now as a homeowner, but also my status as someone who has attained graduate education. It's my status as someone who like works a job that is not in the manual labor or in the service sector, right? Like it is an accumulation of my life experiences that I've been privileged enough to have access to as a result of um pursuing higher education and like getting access to like those sort of spaces and understanding the way in which privilege accumulates and adds up over time.
yeah, no, I really, really appreciate that reflection. And I do want to ask you a follow-up to that around ancestry. So when we think about the journey of our ancestor descent, as I'm also a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade. So as you think about your ancestors, as you consider them, how how do you think they felt about this purchase? And I mean that in a real like spiritual kind of way.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I think about not in this way. I think about this question, but like I just think about this like sort of every day as I'm like living and moving through life, both as like a homeowner and just as like a person who has access to again a level of like freedom and privilege. I think it's almost like I don't love there's a phrase that's in prominence that's like on my ancestors' wildest dreams, and I'm like I don't know if my ancestors dreamed of like labor and the maintenance of white supremacy. Like I don't know if that's quite not that I'm doing that, but like the existence of that in the world. So it's like I don't know if it's quite that, but it is like I do like truly like in my body every day. Like I carry with me that it's that like I am a descendant of the transatlantic slave trade, and I look so much to like my history as a Black American person and the oppression that we have and continue to suffer under in this country. And I think like I have to think that like my ancestors would feel as complicated about my relationship to homeowning as I do, right? Because inherently my feelings about homeownership are tied to the injustices that Black people in America have experienced, right? Like I feel the way that I do because I know that so many people who look like me have been systematically locked out of what I have access to. Um, and knowing that my experience, even in this, is not going to be the same as the white family who lives across the street from me, right? Like their house is going to be valued higher than mine, even if I have a nicer house, simply because they are right and I am not, right? So I would have to think that there it would be a mix of like it would be exactly what I feel, which is like this bittersweet feeling, right? Like recognizing all the good that comes with it and all like the hardship that sits alongside it as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. And now I want to move from ancestors to legacy.
Mm.
So recognizing the complexity of the choice that you made, because it was a choice, right?
Yes.
And in that choice, you're sitting in this piece of I've done something that my elders maybe would not have even imagined doing for
Mhm.
themselves. Maybe my ancestors wouldn't have imagined, but also systemically, I recognize that I'm upholding something that I absolutely
Yeah.
don't agree with. And
Yeah.
so I'm asking you to, but I'm just, let's go there. Like Dr. Amber, talk about legacy. So how do you imagine as a brand new homeowner, you will infuse your values and you will infuse
Mhm.
equity into your existence and your process and experience as a homeowner?
Yeah, I love that question. And I think I'm inherently doing that by proxy of like the neighborhood that I've chosen to live in. I'm in the greater Powderhorn community in Minneapolis, and I'm surrounded by Black and brown folks, right? Both families that live on either side of us are multi-generational Latina families, Spanish speaking, right? Like I'm in a very like truly diverse in terms of like race, gender, economic status, ownership versus renter status, and I think that like even choosing to purchase the house that I did was a recognition that it's like if I'm going to go into this, the work that I do here is going to benefit a community of Black and brown people, right? So one, I think it's also about I know I referenced this earlier. Like I think it's incumbent upon me as a homeowner in this community, both like in this community that I live in Minneapolis, in this world, like to then use that privilege as a homeowner to advocate for people who do not have that same level of access and privilege, right? I think homeowners are notorious for doing things like opposing affordable housing, opposing the construction of shelters that can house people who are unsheltered, right? Like, and I think it's incumbent upon me again as a homeowner to like do that work and advocate and use my voice because use my voice to advocate with elected officials because what we know about people who hold elected office in this country is that the vast majority of them are homeowners and they tend to see themselves in other homeowners. And so it's like, well, how do I then use my access, my privilege, my stability, right? Like the stability of yeah, like I gotta pay this bank my mortgage, but like I just get to like exist in this house, right? It's like so how do I like it's incumbent upon me to like find those ways to be able to like infuse that into this process. And I think I'm thinking broadly about your question of like legacy as well. So I don't have children currently. Maybe will in the future. And I think that like, it's something I think about in this process is like, this could be their house this, will be their house one day as they live here. When I am dead, it could then be the house that they inherit. It could live here because, whatever. And it's like, well, um how do I ensure that 30 years from now this house goes on the market and it's not being sold for twice the amount that I paid for it, right? It's like that's incumbent upon me to like do that sort of labor to not at all times like put my individual need for profit for retirement savings over the needs of what other people might also need, right? Like, because I think about like, the price that we bought this house for wasn't really was I mean, house prices are outrageous, but like within the outrageous, like the family who sold me this house like sold it for a reasonable cost, right? And we paid a reasonable cost for it. And it's like, how do I like what do I like it's incumbent on me to like do something with that and at all times be able and willing to like use my privilege like to do that.
Yes, yes. And so I think it's important to name a couple of things that you just
Please.
pointed out. I think when you talked so much about the mindset and the assumptions and kind of even the political practices holistically, right? No community is a monolith. So just to be clear about that, but generally what we see people show up, especially here in the Twin Cities, is you've got renters that are often fighting for the opportunity for stability, that are fighting for the opportunity for affordability. And often, again, not always, and you're an owner, I'm an owner, we know good owners, okay? But often we see owners showing up as sort of this antithesis to community need in the name of appreciating property values, in the name of we want all the space in our community, right? The NIMBY community. We don't want multi-unit rental properties on our block because we want more space and we don't want to have to worry about a renter mindset in our community. Again, I hope there are owners listening. I'm not going to badmouth the whole of you. I also want you all to recognize that we don't badmouth the whole of renters either, because again, no community is a monolith. We make community together by how we show up. But I do want to call out again, you're thinking of this position, this access, this privilege as an opportunity for an elevated political access, right? It's politicians see themselves this is what I heard you say. Politicians see themselves reflected in ownership because oftentimes they are owners. So how do I use that assumed kind of similarity, that assumed sort of allyship to stand for the rights of renters? And so I think it's one thing that we don't talk a lot about in any discussions around economy are what are the political levers that different kinds of access offer within the system that is insistent upon keeping groups of people beneath, right, down on under the boot, etc., so that a very few can sort of rise to whatever economic level. There's also the thought about what you do with the turnaround. At the end of the day, you might pass away in your home, and I don't mean to be
no, that's what
we all get older and we all die. Okay, so you may be someone who is fortunate to die peacefully in your sleep in your bed in your house, and at the end of the day, that property, that asset doesn't go with you where whatever happens next. And so I really value and want to call it the encouragement for people to consider what comes next. And legacy isn't just an asset for my blood or for my chosen, my family. It can also be an asset for community, and considering what is the community need of this asset at the time of sale. I think that's really important to call out. We have experienced homeowners that have been really intentional about either donating their homes to us at the time of elders moving on, or offering us homes at a lower rate for us to then rehab and then turn around for community at an affordable rate. And so there's so much power in how we think about our access to these tools. So I really appreciate that, and just want to make sure folks didn't miss what you were saying.
I appreciate you reiterating that.
I do want to take us kind of back a little bit, because kind of the point of this was we get to hear from Dr. Amber about this buying experience. So as much as I love being in the sort of heady philosophy scape, let's get back to the concrete. And I'm calling that out for myself. But can you talk to folks a little bit about the pitfalls that you see within ownership? At the beginning, you said, home ownership. You didn't say trap. What did you call it? I'm trying to think of the words you use. A scam. Yep. You said homeownership is a scam. I would like you to kind of break down why you feel that it's a scam.
You are buying a house, and I don't think people look at it as in this cold of terms, but I think they should, because I think it would help people really understand and be realistic about what they are doing. You are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? And whatever those hundreds of thousands look like, depending on what your interest rate is, how much the house is, whatever. You are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars for an asset that is in a constant state of disrepair, it constantly needs you to invest your time, energy, money, brain power into upkeep and maintenance. Um, Anything could go, there are a million and one things that can go wrong at any time, and the responsibility for fixing it is all on you. You buy a house on a hope and a dream that one day, potentially, maybe in the future, undetermined, it will pay off, either in terms of you or your heirs being able to sell it, or that you, and on the assumption that the property value will continue to increase and that you will be able to sell it for more than you paid for it, right? That is the inherent assumption in owning a home. And I think that when you really think about all of those things, it's like, oh, I'm buying a kind of not a great asset in this state. And I think you're also like, you lock yourself into a place that you don't know what the conditions either will be when you buy it or will be in the future, right? Like I think about like the house that we bought. We came to see it. We came for an initial tour. We made an offer. We came back for inspection. And we had to come back for something else. So in total, before we purchased this house, we maybe spent an hour here to we and which is like people buy houses that they spend even less time in than we did, right? um and you are again paying thousands of dollars and potentially years of your life in a space that you don't know very well, right? You don't know what's going on with your neighbors, you don't know what's going on with the neighborhood, you're buying it on a hope and a dream, right? And so I think that like we don't make any other decision, any other major decision about our life under those circumstances most of the time, right? Like there are exceptions, but like when you're thinking about taking a new job or moving to a new city or buying a car, right? You have more time, right? You get to really like sort of sit with the weight of it. But with buying a home, all of that goes out the window, and you are under a different kind of pressure to purchase something and to commit yourself to something that I don't think people have a full. And I often think that people don't have like a full understanding of like the thing that they are making a commitment to, because I think there's a lot of vested interest from the government, from realtors, right, to like obscure that reality. But yeah, like you're not getting a great deal, right? Like typically, like when you really think about it in like really practical terms, you're like, oh, well, yeah, that doesn't sound great, right?
Right. I mean, when you lay it out like that, and that's what I do think is really important, right? So even when we think about this idea of an appreciating asset,
Mhm.
if anyone's paying attention to the housing market, we know that the assets aren't always appreciating, that sometimes they're depreciating assets. We also, if you're paying attention, know that taxes continue to rise. I think when people go into the purchase, they don't consider that. And insurance is now infamous. I mean, insurance we could talk about that, but insurance is its own reality that continues to go up. So to your point at the beginning, you said, I could sit in this house and it just be what it be, right? But your insurance is going to go up, your taxes are going to go up. So even once you paid off that mortgage, and if you're like, I'm happy with the condition of the property, I'm not putting any more money, time, energy into maintenance, you still have those rising costs that you cannot control.
Right. And and I don't think people think about a mortgage as being a fixed cost. And it's like, well, your principal and your interest are fixed.
Yeah.
Okay, but like especially in Minneapolis, like we continue to see rising property taxes because the commercial revenue is down, right? Like those are going up, and insurance, which I think is actually like a really big harbinger of the climate crisis, right, continues to rise across the country. And so like, and I don't think that people like appropriately like factor it, not to mention the costs associated with doing all of the maintenance, right? Like even if it's just like a small $20 here or there, like right, that's cumulative. And I don't think people like factor in like the reality of like all of those costs. They just say, well, my rent is one thing and my mortgage payment would be another, so this number is less, so it's equal. And it's like, well, no, it's actually really, really different.
Right. It's the total cost that you have to consider when going into that purchase. And I think, it's important for us. I do really want to talk about, everything that you've said, all of your reflections in light of this notion of ancestry, of the American dream, this idea, this notion of the American dream and home ownership. Help us understand where this fits, how this all fits together. So I think about what home ownership is, again, historically, for descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, and about the constant pursuit of sort of this equal access to the American dream. Where does this fit for you?
I see, part of the reason why my wife and I went and ultimately decided to buy a house is because our old house really became like a gathering space like for our broader community. And it became so clear to us that like we want a space where people can come to feel like safe, be fed, be taken care of, and ultimately like also a space that like people that like we can offer to people, right? So like part of what we were really intentional about in buying this house was being able to like have the space to, if someone needed to stay with us, to be like to come live with us, we could do that, be that a parent, a friend, right? Like because we've had a couple of situations in our life where like someone needed a place and like we didn't have it, but like that's and like that was a really intentional part for us in buying this house, to say like, can someone come live with us? Do we have the space? Yes, we do now. And so I think like when you ask me that question about like the American dream and like what it means for me, like it's about like being able to take care of people, right? Like in whatever way you like can, and what that looks like. And I think like what that looks like for us is like, okay, our home can be like a refuge. Like it can be like literally a space where people can come. It's like, yep, we've got like, and particularly in the way that our house is set up, like our extra room and bed and bathroom is like in a space that like it's like, yeah, that's just yours, right? Like that could be like for a person or another family that like needed that care. So I think like for me, like how I'm enacting home ownership, how I'm enacting the American dream through home ownership is not through like building generational wealth. It is not through, right? It is like, no, I just have a space where like people can be cared for. And that's the thing that matters to me.
Mm-hmm. How do you see, I'm shifting slightly, but how do you see the concept again? And I want to use quotes because American Dream is not necessarily language that I think a lot of Black and Brown folks really
Yeah.
feel aligned with. But how do you see the notion, the concept of the American Dream sort of evolving as our country becomes more clearly populated with Black and Brown folks as the majority, just as with the rest of the world? How do you see that evolving?
I use my platform to talk a lot about politics, both at the local and national level, right? And I see people, especially Black and Brown folks, like expanding their understanding of what's possible, and and expanding their understanding of what's possible, and expanding their understanding of what we deserve and what we need to like be happy, healthy, and whole in this country, right? I see more people like opening themselves up to the idea that it's like, oh, right, it's not just like healthcare is a part of that, right? Like it's like I to be happy, healthy, and whole. Yeah, I need access to universal healthcare. I need access to universal childcare, right? Like I think it's people being able to like move, and particularly like for Black and Brown folks who are just by nature, I think, a more communal people than like white culture. Like it's opening up that tent to say like, how do I not just take care of me and my like immediate family, but also like all the people I love, right? And like opening up their arms to what it means to be immediate family, right? And so I think the what counts as the American dream, I'm also going to use air quotes there, like just has a bigger um just has a more expanded definition, like as more Black and Brown folks like come into like consciousness and come into the sort of public sphere.
Yes, yes. I really appreciate that. And I think that to that point, as we're willing to challenge these systems and these ideas, homeownership and the idea of it naturally has to evolve, right? And I'd love to hear, just your dream, your personal dream, your personal vision for what homeownership could become in this country.
I would love to see us in private ownership. I think that and someone's gonna ask like, well, what does that look like? I'm not totally sure, right? Like, and I will, like, I'm not totally sure, but the system of how we do and how we, the system of how we do private ownership in this country needs to end and or radically change, right? Because like we let people, you know, some people have multiple houses and some people have no house, have
That's right.
no houses. That
That's right.
that can't continue, right? Like that should not continue, right? It's unjust and it's unfair, right? There's no reason why someone should have three houses and there are people sleeping under the Franklin Avenue Bridge, right? And why I say that is because I would love to see homeownership become more accessible and become expanded such that people who maybe never would have had access to it or had access to owning a home do. And I know that there are people that are trying, right? There are people, there are entities, there are organizations that are trying to open up the aperture of home ownership such that more people are able to access it. I think though there are some problems. I think there's some challenges like with that, which like I'm happy to say more about. But like, yeah, I think we have to end the system and or radically reform the system of private home ownership. I'm thinking about things like I know we have the City of Lakes Land Trust, there's a land trust in the city, right? It's like how do we move more homes into land trust properties, right? Such that they are like publicly owned and like there's sort of the public-private model. We have to drastically like reshape and rethink how we do home ownership in this country because we are allowing a very small percentage of people to have access to homes and allowing an even bigger population of people to never even see the front door, right? And like something has to be radically different there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're at closing time. I really appreciate all of the just thoughtful responses and the vulnerability, which I know you do regularly, but I appreciate getting to kind of push and ask questions. I want to close with a thought on liberation, as this is something that's really important to me in the work that I do and thinking about both my personal and professional, just thinking about my own freedom in the body that I'm in, as well as the collective freedom that I think we are still far from as descendants of the transatlantic slave trade. So maybe the last question to you will just be this: what does the future of freedom, like maybe this is the question. What is freedom? What is freedom for you?
That's a big question, but I appreciate you asking. Give me the opportunity to reflect on it. The eradication of white supremacy. White supremacy is a scourge in our society, and I feel there's so many things we could solve if like white folks stopped considering themselves and whiteness in everything that we do. And along those same lines, you have to end capitalism because capitalism is just white supremacy in a trench coat. I think we have to hey, we're here. Let's do it. We have to end misogyny. We have to end patriarchy. I think freedom necessitates community. And I think that like what white supremacy and capitalism encourage us to do is to be anti-community, right? Because like because we then view like community as competition as opposed to like people we are in solidarity with. And so I think that like we have to like move away from these systems of power and oppression toward like genuine, deep, sustained community building in a way that prioritizes the most marginalized among us. And I think that like which I know sounds very big, right? Like I don't see, I know that sounds very big. And like, I think part of the work that I do is trying to like move us toward that future, right? And it's not a future that I expect to see in my lifetime, right? But like, it's a future that like I know is possible and that I know exists. Um,
Mhm.
I think we have to, yeah, I think freedom is like, it is both like, it's both freedom from systems of power and oppression and like freedom to like build community and solidarity.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Amber. As yes, I thank you so much. This is a great conversation. I'm really grateful for the time. And I'll just say that, freedom, freedom for me is the consideration of all the intersectionalities of identity.
Mm.
It is the space for that. It is the space to think differently, to have neurodivergence. It is the space to understand your physicality in the way that just naturally makes sense to your mind. It is the space to access your ancestry and the culture and the rituals that you spiritually inherited from those people. And it is the ability to choose. It is the ability to choose.
Mm.
So I'm really grateful. This was a beautiful conversation. I feel like my cup was filled. So thank you again. And to our audience, please make sure that you are following Housing in Action and Dr. Amber on social media for Housing in Action across all platforms. It is at Housing in Action. Dr. Amber, please share your socials.
Yeah, I am Doc Amber Alton on both TikTok and Instagram.
Beautiful. And we will include the social media handles in our show notes. So thank you again. And we'll have links to learn more about everything we talked about in our description. And Dr. Amber, is there anything else that you just want folks that are following Housing in Action to track with you?
Yeah. So I've got two things coming up that I'm super excited about. The first is that I will be doing an in-person session with IATA Leads on June 30th. And during that session, I'll be talking about how to do candidate research ahead of the primary elections in Minnesota. So super excited about that. And then in August, on August 22nd, I believe, I will be in Fresno, California, for the Queer Housing Summit, where I am one of the two keynotes. And so I will be some of the ideas that we were talking about here. I'm really excited to expand upon in a larger conversation and discussion in Fresno in August. So excited about both of those events.
Very beautiful, very powerful. Y'all, from your seats in the radio, give it up for Dr. Amber. And Dr. Amber, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for the time.
Thank you so much for tuning into Reclaiming Home for today's discussion. If you like this podcast and want to support Housing in Action's work, find us on socials at Housing in Action or visit our website at www.housinginaction.org. Until next time, remain connected and informed.